do we believe in hell? And if so, what is hell and what is heaven?
Again, this is a very large topic. I suggest that you read that book, Jewish Wisdom, the Jewish Book of
Life After Life.
The Jewish Book of Life After Life. But yes, Gehenna exists. In fact, the word hell in the Torah, and there's many different words in Tanakh, in the Torah and the writings. There's many different words for Shachas and Sheol. Classically, the word is Gehenna. Gehenna is the Valley of Hinnom, which is literally a place in Jerusalem, in Yerushalayim, where there was some type of idol worship, and then it became a garbage dump. And obviously, that's a metaphor. It's a metaphor. So one way of understanding this process, let's first understand one thing, that when we talk about Gehenna, we talk about this process of an afterlife process, some type of cleansing process. There's no eternal condemnation. There's no you're stuck in this situation for eternity. That doesn't exist. There's no such thing. There is processes of Gehenna, and the process of Gehenna is that in an image of the Emek HaMelech, one of the classic Kabbalists, is that it's like an idea of a sponge, which means that it soaks up all the negativity that we experience throughout this world, throughout this life. And then, but the intention is that eventually we get out of that place, and then we move to a place of Gan Eden, to paradise. That the soul returns to its root. The idea of the soul returning to the root will be eventually the soul will get back to its place, and it's a process to get there. The longest process would be 12 months. That's the longest staying in Gehenna. The Shoyim in Gehenna is 12 months. The Mishnah says in Yedias. But it's not internal. There's nothing nitzchi. It's not everlasting, because negativity is not nitzchi. It's not eternal. Only positivity, only kedusha is nitzchi, is eternal. So in one image of the Zohar is that, which you mentioned before, one image of the Zohar is that a person after 120 sees the light of the Shekhinah, the Hashem's presence, the light of the presence. And if a person is Zacha, person's refined, they go out and they expire in the light of the presence. And that's considered a positive experience. And that same experience, this is why it says that the Yalkut says, one of the Midrashim said, the difference between Gan Eden and Gehenna, paradise and hell, is the difference. It's a chut asara, it's like one thin little hair breadth, because it's almost like the same experience could be positive and elating and joyful to one, of this ecstasy of letting go, versus another person that can be very traumatic, and it can be very something that it seems that it's great darkness. And the image of the Zohar is that the Shekhinah's presence leaves, and the soul is left in a state of darkness, of choshech, of darkness, which is another image that the Medrash, our sages say, that's the image of Gehenna, that it's the absence of life, absence of light, that it appears to be that you're stuck in darkness. So I would just say, like, very, very loosely, to understand a little bit the process, because again, the process is not eternal. It's a time state, even though time doesn't really exist in an afterlife. But in our conception, the way we understand it, it would have a certain time restraint. It's only a 1 year process, which means it goes through all the seasons. That's really what it really means. It means that the soul has to go through different processes, through the seasonal processes, in order to refine itself. It's all different types of stages, and the essential idea is that the difference between something positive or negative, or a mitzvah and an avera, a good deed versus a sin, is really an attachment to ego versus a sense of transcendence. I mean, this is very loosely, but the depth of this idea is very clean. That that negativity is always about the self. A person becomes angry, a person hurts someone, God forbid, or even Ben Adam Labakim. It's always about my ego, myself, versus kedusha. The idea of holiness is to transcend the ego, or make the ego transparent, to live a larger existence. So when a person passes on, and when we say a person passes on, it means the entirety of the person still survives, the entire memory of the person, everything of the person remains. There are stages for the soul to shed these negativities that it accumulated throughout its journey of 100, 120 years throughout life, allow for the soul to purify itself in order to return back to its pristine state. So I'm going to give you a few examples of this in sequence, but it doesn't necessarily mean that every single soul goes through these sequences. But for example, a very light form of this type of refinement process is called Olam Hadimion, the world of imagination, which means a person, let's say, lives, 120 years, and they're a shoemaker, okay? And they work till the end of their life. Every day they got up in the morning, and with a regimen, they went every single day, and they went to the shoe store. Comes 120, they pass on. Let's say a person passes on in his sleep, passes on. What happens the next day? I'm not talking about literally day, but what happens in the next process? The consciousness of the person, which means the entirety of the person, is so attached to its narrative of being a shoemaker that it still lives in the illusion that it's still alive, that the soul still lives in the illusion that it's still alive, and does exactly what it did the day before. So if the day before it went to the shoe store or bought the newspaper, whatever it did the day before in its very trivial, mundane life, the soul, obviously not in a literal sense, but the soul lives in this world. It's called Olam Hadimion, the world of imagination, or Olam Hatoyu, the world of chaos, or of confusion. The soul lives in a state of confusion, and it goes ahead doing the same things that it did always. And this is part of the process of unlearning its attachment. It's because it's so attached, it doesn't even know that it's even possible that it's not attached. So it thinks it's attached. And one day it's going to wake up and have some type of awareness by sort of interacting with people for a certain period of time and not getting a response from anybody. It's going to finally realize that it's no longer alive. And that's the first stage where it can extricate itself out of this physical world, out of the attachments of the physical world. There's a story about a Chassidish Rebbe that there was once an old man once came to him. He was sitting with his son. It's a very mystical story, but he was sitting with his son, and this old man came in and started complaining that his granddaughters need shidduchim, need someone to marry, and the older girls need someone to marry. And the Rebbe gave this man a blessing and said, "But why are you worried about these things?" He said, "What do you mean? What, they're my grandchildren? I have to take care of them?" He said, "Yeah, but you're no longer alive." He said, "What do you have? I'm no longer alive." And sort of like he was woken up from this stupor, and he recognized that he was no longer alive, and I don't know, he disappeared, whatever that means. And his son was sitting there. This Chassidic Rebbe's son was sitting there and said, "Ta, what just happened?" He said, "This soul was a confused soul. Soul exists in Olam Hadimion, the world of imagination, and didn't recognize that it passed on." So the son had a fright and said, "And how do I know I'm alive?" He says, "Because you just asked a question. Because if you ask a question whether you're alive, that's already, if you're questioning your existence. If you don't question your existence, you can be living and really you're not alive." That's really a metaphor also on a very deep level, like if you question your existence. So that's the first stage, a possible first stage. Another possible second stage of this process, just go through the stages. These are things that are not so familiar, so it's worth maybe discuss them a little bit. These are called from all the deeper teachings of the Ari and teachings of Kabbalah and the Zohar. The next stage is something that's called a Dybbuk. A Dybbuk is like an attachment. The word Dybbuk is kind of a popular, but it's not really the original word. It's only about a few hundred years old. Used that word in Sefer Bris. It's not an older word. Originally, it was called the Ruach Ra, and what that means is that when the soul recognizes that it is no longer in a body, but its existence, it only knows its existence in attachments to bodies. What it wants to do is attach itself to a body. Because if it feels like if my whole existence is in this physical world, I eat, I sleep, I drink, whatever I do in this physical world, now I'm not doing that any longer, and I recognize that I'm no longer alive. Okay, that's one type of recognition. So now my next best thing is let me find another body and attach myself to that body and live through that body. That's like what people call being possessed by another soul, which is a naked soul. As I said, the souls are naked souls, which is they don't have any garments, they don't have any mitzvahs, they don't have any positive things to hold on to, and therefore they attach themselves to a person that's also someone like this. I mean, it's very unusual. Most times it's not real. It's not a real thing. But it's very highly unusual, but it's a possibility. It's a possibility for the soul to attach itself. This is called a form of Dybbuk, a form of attachment. And then eventually the soul also um, recognizes or is forced out, or whatever the process is, to recognize that it shouldn't be in this body, and then it lets go. So these are like two stages that could happen, either world of imagination or Dybbuk or attachment to something else. And then comes a process, and a lot of times people don't go through the first two processes. It goes straight to something that's called Dybbuk HaKever. Dybbuk HaKever means the pounding of the grave. This is also mentioned by our sages in Chazal and Medrash. What is this idea? The idea is that kosher in the Mlames, the Gemara says, our sages tell us that that worms are very painful for the body. Now, what does that mean? Once your soul realizes that you're no longer attached to the body, or you're no longer embodied, but it's still connected to its body, then it becomes very strongly aware of its body. And as the body is decomposing, depending on your attachment to the body, will be the pain that you're going to experience. It's not a literal pain, but it's more like phantom pain. Phantom pain is, for example, let's say a person has, God forbid, an accident, and they lose a limb. They lose let's say, their left hand. God forbid. When a person would put a needle in the location where the left hand would be, the person will experience pain because there's an association at that place that's connected to pain. And this is, Saadia Gaon talks about this in terms of, as a metaphor, in terms of a person watching a home that they lived in for many years go up in flames. Now, if the home is your life, and I'm not saying you shouldn't be, but you're very attached to the house, and very connected to the house, you have very fond memories and experiences in the house, then of course when you see the house going up in flames, it's very, very painful. It's almost a visceral physical pain that you're experiencing, even though it's not literal. But if it's a home that you say, it did me a great service, I used the home for a certain period of time, but now I can only move to my next home if I need to burn down this home to build up a bigger home. And if we can use this metaphor, then it's sort of, there's a sense of pain maybe of letting go of the old, but you know that something much more wonderful is coming and there's a tremendous amount of joy. This would be why according to the sages, tzaddikim don't experience the pain of Dybbuk HaKever is a person that lives a very elevated life, someone who lives a very non-attached life, and I'm not saying you shouldn't be attached to the physical world. You should be attached to the physical world, but it shouldn't be attached in a way of a neurosis, in a way with anxiety. It should be attached because that's the intention. That's Hashem wants us to be in the body. But the moment we know that the intention is to let go of the body, we can let go. It's like you're attached to like your whatever you have in your life. You're attached to when you're supposed to attach. And when Hashem says it no longer belongs to you, you let go of it, right? That's a healthy way of looking at even an object in your life. I love the thing that I have because Hashem gave it to me. This is what my tikkun is part of this thing. And if it's stolen from me, that was Hashem's plan that this thing should be let go of. And now it's toxic. I should let go of it. So that is a refinement that happens in Dybbuk HaKever. Again, it's processes of letting go. A more refined process, and some people don't have to go through any of the three first processes that we spoke about, is called Kaf HaKela. And Kaf HaKela means where a person is moves in and out of different states of consciousness, which is that you already start understanding what your real purpose was to be in this world. Not only the things that you messed up in this world, but really your potential that you could have achieved in this world. The din and the cheshbon, the two things, the accounting and the judgment. That on one hand you look at your life the way you lived, and on the other hand you look at the life the way you could have lived. Hopefully there's no dichotomy. Hopefully there's no kafakella. You're not swinging back and forth of consciousness, but it's the same thing. But if a person did have this type of dichotomy where they finally realize, like, I really wasted so much of my time. If I really, really used my time well in this world, I could have done this, I could have done that. I'm talking about spiritually, really. Then that's another form of pain, of type of psychological, spiritual pain, and the letting go. And finally, there's the classic definitions of Gehenim, which is translated as hell. One is Gehenim shel Shelik, one is Gehenim of ice, and Gehenim shel Eish, and Gehenim of fire. Now, obviously, very clearly, this is not literal. There's no little, angels poking your feet with, hot coals. This is a metaphor, and the mashal, the mashal of this metaphor of this idea is that. Remember, the end game of everything is we have all these experiences, we have to let go of them. In order to move, for us to expunge these negative experiences so our soul, our consciousness, our selfhood, can experience unity with Hashem, return back to its source, into a positive state, we have to let go of all these negative things. Now, granted, we can do this through tshuva, of course. We can do this in life. We don't have to wait for the afterlife process. Of course, that's the whole intention, is that we can let go of these processes. But if we don't, and a person passes on, so the process of letting go is to recall to memory these experiences. And there are two forms of embarrassment, so to speak. One is like an intellectual embarrassment, we'll say, more like an intellectual embarrassment is not when you turn red. It's not like when you, certainly, let's say a kid turns very embarrassed. They do something, and then it's an emotional embarrassment. They did something, and they know they did something wrong, and they're caught. But then that's the Gehenim of Eish. That's the hell of fire, which is I was so passionately involved in this thing. I'm so embarrassed. Okay, and that's the awareness of the embarrassment is in itself the way that we let go of it. That's one form of embarrassment. But then there's like more an intellectual embarrassment. Like when I think about this, like it didn't really make any sense for me to do this. That's more like a cold, detached form of observation and embarrassment. And these two forms of self-embarrassment is the process the way we let go of these negative things. And again, so this is the general structure, overall structure of what hell is, essentially. What all these experiences are. Ultimately, they're experiences that allow us to drop these negative things that we experience in life, that we perpetuate in life, really, to get to a place that we become cleansed, and we become refined and zacha, we become transparent and refined, and then we could return back into our source, into our original, the place where our souls come from, and that's the refinement. So ultimately, it's to get to the place of Gan Eden. Gan Eden, the Gehenna is just to get to the place of Gan Eden.
So this really flips the general understanding and connotations of hell, at least in English, with English connotations.
In which way?
Well, I think maybe it's that this type of terminology is used in Christian text mostly, and so we're receiving it in English through that
correct.
And so kind of inherently, I think people, when they think of hell, they think of eternal damnation.
They think of
sentenced one way or another, and it's seemingly permanent. And
correct. They think of it as
so healthy, and if anything, this explanation, it shows Hashem's mercy.
For sure.
There's
absolutely.
Hashem will never leave you dirty. He'll always clean you up.
Lo yidach melech nidach. Of course. I mean, what is Hashem? Hashem is what is Hashem? Hashem is not a grand punisher. There is no internal condemnation, and it's only a process of refinement. And the main thing of this whole conversation is, which is like most important, is In terms of right now, I can say, okay, I messed up. I did this. I did this other thing. Okay, any moment you can do tshuva. You can return. You can change your ways, and everything in your past can be transformed into merits. And there will be no need for any of these experiences that we talked about. You go straight from stay from in Gan Eden. Um, but definitely this people are generally think very literal, and especially when it's depicted in art, like it's like some type of image of some Bosch painting, or this or Dante Inferno, some type of horrifying imagery. But Hashem is a the nature of Hashem is good, is to give goodness, is to bring us back to the place of goodness, to bring us back to wholeness. We mess up, and it's part of our process. I mean, and if we mess up during life, we have to make sure, or we should make sure, that during life we could go through all these processes. That's why, part of tshuva, part of real tshuva is regret and all this type of things, that to expunge these things from memory, and even experiencing busha, like some type of shame, internal shame of like, I can't believe I did that. It's like, it's unbecoming of me. And that's a cleansing process. It's painful, but it's cleansing, and then you're freed, and you're free.